Ngā mihi nui e ho mā, nau mai hoki mai ki oku whakaaro, mai iti te rangapaia I hukaraiti. Welcome again, friends. It's great to be with you to share this reflection from the Gospel of Christ. The lectionary still has us running through the book of Luke at the moment, and today we're up to chapter 17, verses 11 to 19, a story about 10 lepers. First though, a few housekeeping things to keep us all up to date. You won't have forgotten that there's a war in Ukraine still, and it'd be great to continue to pray and support our friends and family in that place, and also all people suffering from war around the globe at the moment. You'll also be aware that for the last year or so, since September 21, we've been celebrating 50 years on the road as a club, and a few weeks ago we were gathering together in Melbourne to honour the Melbourne chapter for reaching that milestone. And we had people coming from across Europe. 3 of us from this chapter went over, and a number of people, most people from around Australia, were travelling together to get to Melbourne. On the way, a bunch of bikes were involved in a serious pile-up on a wet and slippery highway. Unfortunately, our brother Baz died at the scene. Many others went to hospital, and Glenn is still in hospital recovering from his injuries at the moment. So we're very aware of Baz's family and Glenn's family as they grapple with the reality of that situation. And also on that heady weekend of celebration, we launched this book, The First 50 Years, which tells many of our stories on the road as a club. It's well worth having a read and being inspired by some of the things that we've experienced on the road with Jesus as a club. We've always taken our cue to be on the road with Jesus from these gospel records that we look at week after week on these reflections. And as Jesus is travelling towards Jerusalem, he comes across a bunch of lepers in the borderlands between Samaria and Galilee, a very rural backwater place in rural Israel. Being in the borderlands, we could maybe translate that idea into the twilight zone or no man's land as other descriptors to describe the type of sociological space they were operating in this story. That type of place where we're unsure whether we're coming or going, whether it's black or white. That grey, indeterminate space with few landmarks and little security. Now, while in that space, they encounter a group of 10 lepers, men who, due to their illness, were ritually unclean and pushed out of the mainstream nice society to live at the edge of town. These guys could have been quite a circus on their own, probably too. So now we have 2 chaotic groups about to meet, Jesus and his friends and these marginalised lepers. These lepers were also a mixed race collection of people brought together into a tight social group by their dis-ease and marginal location at the extreme edge of the village. Common and intense shared life can create a very strong sense of solidarity and belonging, especially if we're cut off from real power. On realising it was Jesus arriving in town, these lepers lose whatever sense of social decorum they still may have had and begin to shout madly towards Jesus, "Heal us! Set us free from this disease! See us! Love us!" Straight away Jesus responds with compassion and sends them off to the priests for a ritual cleansing ceremony and to be reinstated into the wider community. On the way to see the priests, all 10 are healed, but only one returns to thank Jesus, and it turns out to be a Samaritan. We should know by now from Luke that Samaritans are mixed race people that are despised by true blue Jews back in these days. And Luke always makes them, the Samaritan, the hero of the story, doing what the religious and acceptable people were meant to be doing, but usually didn't. Over the last 50 years on the road together, we have collected many stories that have these same marks in them. Our chaotic bunch has regularly encountered other creative bands of people, often marginalised from the centres of power, and yet we're sometimes surprised, but we shouldn't be, by some of the incredibly special things that usually happen when these encounters happen. We may realise ourselves that we have been healed in some way from some affliction we have, like privilege. Or we go, wow, that was a real experience of grace and hope. And we recognise that the kingdom of Jesus that he spoke about and embodied appears in these unlikely shadowland type of places. These events are normal at the edge of society in the borderlands, away from the centres of power. Even in the midst of this tragedy of Baz's passing, as a club we are experiencing many special moments from just travelling together. The care we are receiving from others, other clubs, other brothers on the road has been incredible. The outpouring of support at our loss has been unimaginable and humbling. This way of Jesus to embrace those at the powerless edge is strange to many, especially the powerful. But for us in Squad, it is all we know. Our patch grounds us into the reality of what that means every day, every time we ride. If you are new to the way of Jesus, can I please encourage you to take a risk? Trust the love of God and embrace those lepers of mixed race outside the halls of power and see where the Spirit of God will lead you. We have been surprised many times to discover that the best things happen in the most unlikely places with the left out bit actors with nothing to prove and only love and solidarity to cling on to. Life on the road is never dull, but at the moment for us it is very painful as we mourn Baz's passing. But we will continue on together. We will continue to listen for the call of Christ, to continue to love our neighbour and let our neighbour love us. Rangamari me te aroha o te atua ki a tātou, i a tātou. Cheers and God be with you all. Amen.